Never before have I had such an enticing build-up. Craig's going to come and talk about logistics. Bloody hell. I'll talk a little bit about logistics, but probably not too much. I'll talk mainly about the awards. I have my thing. Is anything going to happen? There we go. Lovely. It's the best time of the year, I think, and it's always been a period that I've kind of been involved with in some way or other for most of the time that I've been in strategy, either in terms of thinking about papers to write or submitting papers, or a few years ago, so long ago that Chris Gallery was still at McCann's, it was a time when I was able to be on the shortlisting panel as well. And at that stage, you get this wonderful kind of big box that arrives in your office full of papers to read. And it just always felt a little bit like getting a present. And it was a present which was a funny kind of Forrest Gump type selection box where some of them would be quite amazing and other ones would be a little disappointing, but everything that you read in that box would enable you to reflect upon something you were doing strategically, inspire you to do something else, and gave you a wonderful sort of snapshot of the state of the industry at that point in time and what strategy meant to everybody who was a strategic practitioner at the time. I think those years ago when I first started doing it, it was primarily papers from London, and that's changed radically in the years since. Our LATAM Grand Prix winner from last time being a great example of that, but these awards have become much more now a representation of the state of strategy globally in communication agencies and other allied disciplines. And it's just a great moment for us all to kind of stop and reflect on what it's all about. Now, the awards primarily are about the generosity of the planning community in sharing their learning. And the APG in general has always been about trying to increase and improve the capacity of strategists in whatever agency they're in to produce better work, better strategic thinking, more creative ideas, things which will stimulate more interesting things to happen in the businesses and clients they're working with. And the most wonderful thing about the APG Awards is not the winners at the end of it. It is the bank of knowledge that sits behind it, available to all members for free on the APG website, a source of tremendous inspiration, win or lose. And so if you enter, you are helping to contribute to that bank of knowledge. You're helping primarily to make your counterparts, the generations that will come after you and the generations that came before you, a little bit better at their jobs. And whilst we are all a little bit competitive, of course, and we're all thinking about trying to win or trying to help our agencies win, the most important part is that learning, because the stronger we all are and the stronger strategy as a discipline is, the stronger each of us is individually when we walk into a room with clients. And if only one or two of us are great and the rest of us are not so great and those one or two are winning those awards, then all of us become a little less influential in those conversations that we have. So it's really about all of us, and it's about all of us working together. But of course, it's also about winning. So a few notes on winning. As you're thinking about this process, stage one is the shortlisting process. And the shortlisting process is really the most important part of the APG Creative Strategy Awards, because anything that gets shortlisted wins an award. The shortlisting has always been done on the basis of a written paper, and that remains the case this time. So we often kind of look into the numbers of these things, and so the bare facts of shortlisting are that in a big year, when we get 125 plus papers, you'll have around about a 1 in 5 chance of getting shortlisted. In a normal year, maybe around about 1 in 4. So all you need to do is to find 3 other people writing a paper and make their papers a little worse than yours. Amongst any 4 people writing a paper, 1 of them is going to get shortlisted. And it's worth thinking about those odds, because what that tells you is something quite simple about the shortlisting process, and people kind of say, well, what's the trick? What's the way in which my paper can get shortlisted rather than others? And the simple thing about it is your paper has to be better than 3 others, consistently. And it's fine if you've done a piece of strategic thinking that's kind of good, that's okay. And there's a lot of papers that we read where the strategic thinking is a good professional piece of work. But in order to get shortlisted, it's going to have to be above average, distinctly above average, because it's not a 50-50 game, it's a 1 in 4 game. And so when you're writing it, the simple way to get shortlisted is to think about what have you done that is a little better than what you think other people might have done. What have you done that was a little better than the thinking you did on the other brands that you worked on that you're not writing case studies about? What was the bit that you put in that was a little bit cleverer, that was a little bit more influential? What's the thing that's as good as all of the other papers that you've read in the books from APG Awards entries in the past? What's the thing that makes you sort of stand out? So spending time thinking about what that thing is really important if you want to get shortlisted in that first stage. What are you writing about? The clue's in the name, right? So it's the APG Creative Strategy Awards. It's not the APG Awards for creative work that a strategist happened to be involved in at some point or could plausibly claim to have been in the room when it was written or presented. It's the APG Creative Strategy Awards. So we're rewarding creative strategic thinking, not as the APG Awards used to in the past, strategic thinking that happened to be around some good creative work. So if you've been involved in writing a strategy and the outcome of it, whatever it may have been, whether it was advertising or social media or a digital campaign or PR or whatever it might have been, if the outcome of it, the execution of it was not a multi-award winning piece, it doesn't really matter. As long as your strategic thinking was creative and has had a broader influence than you might have thought. Tracy mentioned Lawrence Friedman's talk at the APG Strategy Conference last year, and I think, again, it's well worth having another look at that. The book is quite long. I'm sure you read the introduction or something, I'm sure it's all in there. Or simply think about this one thing. He defined strategy and good strategy as one thing and one thing only. And good strategy is achieving more in a situation than the ingoing balance of power would suggest. So think about that as you're writing papers or trying to think about the influence of what you're writing and the creativity of the strategy you've come up with. Establish that context. What might the ingoing balance of power meant in any situation about your brand versus competitors or your task versus the consumer context or any of those other things, and think about what might have happened had you not been there. What might have happened had it been you on a normal day versus you at the very top of your game, which of course it was because you're writing an APG Creative Strategy paper about it. What was the thing that affected the balance of power when the reckoning was counted at the end? What made it bigger, better? What made it more competitive? What made it more interesting? What made it more culturally influential? And it really is as simple as that. The other trick about writing a great paper is simply to be honest. You know, tell the story as it happened, tell all of the things that happened in that story, think about what someone might be wondering about and make sure you account for that. These are not the APG NEAT Strategy Awards. So again, as Tracy was talking about, no strategic idea survives contact with the enemy. We know that life is a little bit messy sometimes. We know that any of the things we do nowadays are the product of collaborations where not everybody's going to do exactly what you want them to do or what you designed at the beginning. There are no prizes here for pretending something was neater and simpler than it was. And in fact, if you write a paper where you seem to have no setbacks at all and everything seemed to go exactly as you defined that it would go at the beginning, that's likely to arouse a little bit of suspicion if everything seems a little too smooth and a little too neat. So think about that honesty and think about how you can tell a really compelling story out of what really happened, a story that is coherent and a story that shows that you had some creative strategic thinking that then played out in an interesting way in the world and you had something to do with making it better. But don't try and pretend it was simpler or easier than it was. Now, part of the reason for that, of course, is going to be the second stage of these awards, and the awards remain unique in that they have a two-stage structure whereby you write a paper to begin with and you submit that paper. The shortlist is created on the basis of that written paper. We normally shortlist, as I say, around about 20-25 papers depending on the quality in any given year. And then all those papers will win an award of some sort, bronze, silver, gold, special prizes, Grand Prix. But the colour of the award that you win is dependent on the second stage. Now, the second stage in the past used to look a bit like this. whereby you would turn up and you would make a presentation. You'd have your best PowerPoint, and there would be an audience of the great and the good that would sit there and they would listen to you for a good 15 minutes. And you'd kind of tell your story and you'd perform, and you might bring some props or play some video or something or other, and you'd try and sort of do it. And I remember I've done this 2 or 3 times as an entrant. Always absolutely terrifying, much more terrifying than presenting to a client, because these are people who kind of know something about the job you're doing, for God's sake. You can't pull the wool over their eyes. It's an audience of your peers, which is absolutely awful. And it sometimes tends to look and feel a little bit like this. And they'll sit there stony-faced trying to not to give anything away and not to be too encouraging, because that might mean that they are showing that they like your thing better than the other thing. Quite a remarkable process. So we were concerned that it was becoming a little bit too much the kind of, creative strategy performance. And we were beginning to worry that we were maybe awarding people who were really slick at presenting and who had a good sort of agency infrastructure behind them that was able to produce great video or bring wonderful props in and had a fantastic kind of backroom team helping them out. And it just didn't feel quite genuine. So what we're doing is we're changing it to something that's a little bit more like this. Whereby at that second stage, rather than making a big set piece presentation, you'll be invited to summarize your paper just in a few minutes, and then it will turn into much more of a chat show, much more of a question and answer, whereby the jury themselves will ask you questions about the paper that they will have read. And again, in the past, they never used to read the papers, they just used to take the presentation on face value. So there will be a conversation about your paper. Now, just thinking about that conversation, of course, go back to this one. So there is now even more onus on you to have written about a thing that actually happened. Because once you're actually questioned upon it, that's where you're going to come unstuck if you haven't done that thing before. And that's when that might turn into something a little bit more like this. But we do rather hope not. So hopefully a little bit more congenial like this. You get to be Julie Walters, we get to be Graham Norton. It'll all be fantastic. So that's the biggest change to the way it works. But as I say, the most important piece is that shortlisting bit. Often people will say, what's the trick? How do you get in? I'm sure you'll all be asking, you must ask Tracy repeatedly to define influence as well, because that'll be amusing when we get back into the Q&A again. She's had a good go at it so far, but ask her again. That is a thing that you can think about. But to be honest, the way to win these awards is pretty simple. Remember some good creative strategic thinking you've done, and then write about it in as sort of simple and compelling a way as you can. We introduce themes into these awards each time. It's really just a way of saying this is what we're thinking might be the state of art of the discipline at the moment. But anything which won APG Creative Awards in the past, if it's a really great case, it would probably still win this year. Think about influence, but don't worry or obsess about it too much. It's just about having done some great work, told a great story about it, and then having been authentic in your creation of it enough to be able to talk about it persuasively with a group of people after. And it really is as simple as that. So in the spirit of great papers, I will hand over to Luis, who will take you through the paper that he did. So you're reenacting your presentation, right? Okay, so this is a little bit more like this, and less like this. But a fantastic presentation and a case that, as I say, even though the theme has changed slightly, this probably would still have won the Grand Prix. So this is roughly what you're going to be up against. Thank you.